We are about to begin with our second panel discussion for today. It's called Shared Histories, Reviving Ukraine's Jewish Legacy. Throughout history, Jewish culture has been deeply intertwined with Ukrainians' identity. Yet much of this rich heritage has been lost or suppressed. Today's discussion will explore how we can restore and celebrate this legacy, ensuring it remains an integral part of Ukraine's diverse and resilient identity. So the moderator of this panel discussion is Paulina Sokolow, and she is hopefully ready to present her panelists. Welcome.
Dear panel, do you hear me? Yeah. Dear panel and dear guests, I'm delighted and honored to introduce you to this excellent and exquisite trio. And you will share your experience and knowledge of the existing and in many ways hidden world of Jewish Ukraine, or as the title of this panel says, Reviving Ukraine's Jewish Legacy. So, Żanna, Słoniowska, you were born in Lviv, and you're a writer and translator, and you wrote the acclaimed novel, The House with the Stained Glass Window, published in Poland in 2015, and it's translated into multiple languages, and we will work on so that it will be translated into Swedish. And the story in the book revolves around a group of people, mainly women, from different generations, and they're facing the big changes that took place in 1989 and onwards in Ukraine, Lviv. And you're presently based in South Africa?
No, in Kenya.
In Kenya. But recently you lived in Krakow, where you also
Last
worked.
20 years, yeah.
And you're also one of the initiators behind the research project and website Lwów przedwojenny. And we will take a look on that in a minute. Olha, Mukha, you were also born in Lviv, and you, among other things, are the head of communication at the Territory of Terror Memorial Museum in Lviv. Which we definitely want to know more about. And you're also program director of Ukrainian Association of Culture, Lviv. And Yuriy, Gurzhiy, you were born in Ukraine, but in Kharkiv, and you have a Jewish background of which you knew little about for a long time. And you and your family left Kharkiv in 1996 when you were 20. And not until then you started to dive into the Jewish Ukrainian cultural heritage, namely the musical side of it. In your practice as an artist and DJ, klezmer has formed an important role. And I just love the name of your projects. Russen Disco, Borsh Division, The New Donbass, Ukrainian songs of love and hate, and my favorite, Shtetl Superstar. And we will hear excerpts from your music in a minute. And as for myself, my family roots are from Russia and Poland, and my name is Paulina Sokolow. And I was born here in Stockholm, and my parents left Poland in 1969 after a wave of anti-Semitism. And since for Jews, Shabbos begins in any minute, you can tell that I am secular, and we are all here. I just wanted to start this conversation by stating a few points. As Julia stated already, it's impossible to tell the history of Ukraine without talking about Jewish history. And Ukraine used to have one of the biggest, if not the biggest Jewish population in Europe, and 1/3 of the population in Ukraine used to be Jewish. And as far as we know, Jews have lived in Ukraine for more than 1,000 years. And sadly, we know a lot about Jewish life because of documented pogroms, as way back as in the 17th century, maybe even earlier. And also is it stated that many cruel massacres, the massacres were reasons for the birth of a new religion which has been influential in Judaism, which is Hasidism. and in which it was the context in which Klezmer was born as well. And many of the greatest writers of Ukraine were Jews, although mostly Russian-speaking, like Vasily Grossman, Isaac Babel. 70% of the Jewish population was killed during World War II, assisted by Ukrainians, and many Jews also left Ukraine in the 90s. But most importantly, according to Wikipedia, still Ukraine has the fourth biggest Jewish population in Europe, which is actually twice as much as in Sweden. And Olha, the first question is to you. I have a feeling that there is a past for Jews and coexistence in Ukraine, and then a long period of time of nothing, and now there is something going on again. Is there a renaissance for Jewish Ukrainian past and present?
I think that it's difficult to say that nothing again. It's rather the period of Soviet occupation. There was a blank page, which was not necessarily nothing, but rather oppressed identity, because as you can see, all those Jews you can count today, they not reappeared in Ukraine all of a sudden. They were living there, but the issue of self-identity was always very harsh. But just digging deeper into Ukrainian history, I think that accepting and embracing that Jewish history is a part of Ukrainian culture is a necessary thing, as even in Kyiv Rus in 10th century, we had Jewish gates, one of those. So it states how things looked those times. And basically, the very first of our independence approaches at the very beginning of the 20th century, the third universal of Ukrainian National Republic. It was written in 4 languages, and I was ashamed even to learn about it quite recently. There was a New York-based, the Full Circle exhibition, where I found the original print where it was written in Ukrainian, Polish, Russian, and obviously in Hebrew, not in Hebrew, in Yiddish. And that was very nicely put that this what reflects the actual state of things. So those were cultural links which were always there. But in my Soviet childhood, for example, there were some things which we had no idea that they became from the Jewish culture in those exchanges. I literally recently realized why we were never mixing meat and fish. It comes absolutely from Jewish cuisine culture. But in Galicia, it's just a kind of normal state of things. You never mix that. Just because before the Second World War, literally 1/3 of the urban population were Jews. And in my in a building where I live in Lviv, there are 6 flats. And this is such a great representation because there are us, which are the mixture of everything I know but no Jewish blood, unfortunately. And then the Polish family, then the Jewish family, then one Muslim family from Crimea, and 2 other are renting. And this is amazing.
In your house?
Yeah, this is like the 6 flats, right, in a city center of Lviv. And this is such a great representation of how we cooperate and live. And I remember that we would never put outside our laundry on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. This is a beautiful example of a mutual respect, right? You refer to the Muslim tradition, you refer to Shabbat, you refer to Sunday, obviously a Christian tradition. And obviously we had some internal tensions, that's natural with the neighbors, but I think that in this period of so-called nothing, that was definitely the only result of Soviet oppression. And you know, they played it very masterly. At the very beginning of Soviet Union, they just kind of declared the support of national identities. Obviously, they listed all the activists and then they killed them all. This is what was. And being Jewish in the later years of Soviet Union was a very challenging thing. There was there were limitations to get to the university, to get a higher education, to build your career, to travel abroad as well. That was a very complicated situation when you were, on the one hand, pressed to leave, but then you were not allowed. And this is how it worked, just driving you totally crazy and pushing you to hide your identity as much as possible. One of my friends, she's a Lviv blogger, Marta Meili. She recently this year, a few weeks ago, she got back to her original Jewish surname. So this is...
Mazel tov.
Exactly. This is the process which is happening right now.
But am I wrong or am I right? Is there a renaissance, you would say? And if so, how can you see it and why now?
I think that, well, not now, but before the Russian war against us, we had this luxury of a couple of decades of time to rediscovering ourselves, to be with our own, and then we started to find out how close we were. And even now, it's still part of this embracing the Ukrainian identity, which includes being Crimean Tatar or includes being Jewish as well. And yesterday there were a lot of discussions, and today there was a really great discussion just before ours about nationalism and identity. And I remember the 1990s famous and shameless speech of Bush about Ukraine and suicidal nationalism. And the blunt nationalism we were blamed by Americans. But I think that what you need to understand about Ukrainian national idea, this is not the blood-based. This is a political choice. And this is a choice for freedom and your identity, which embraces all those diverse cultural roots as well.
Thank you, Olha. Żanna, do you have anything to add? You have studied Lviv as well. Do you see... what is the Jewish Lviv for you?
So I would... I think my encounter with the Jewish history in Lviv, where I was born, I could divide it in, so to say, two waves or two topics. So first, it's the history of the pre-war Lviv community, Jewish community, and almost all of them were killed during the Holocaust, which means that more than 100,000 people were killed, and only about 500 people plus 2 families survived. And that's like one story which was completely forbidden in Soviet Union when I was a child, when I was a teenager. We had no idea, like nothing. It was forbidden to tell about it. There were no books, no knowledge. The same street, the same architecture, but this story, it was absent. But the same was, say, Ukrainian insurgent army, UPA, and many other stories, not only Jewish story. But at the same time, we were having so-called like Soviet Jews. The Jewish people we were just living together with in Lviv. And they were my classmates, they were my teachers, they were mostly Russian speakers. And they were Jewish people who came after World War II to the Soviet Lviv, and they were living there for generations as well. And at one point, and it was like right before the collapse of Soviet Union, of Iron Curtain, maybe a little bit earlier, they starting to disappear. I mean, they were immigrating because they were allowed to.
You think they left because they were allowed, or do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Were allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. Suddenly, they were allowed. They were allowed. You have to prove you had to prove your Jewish origin, and then you were able to allow. And for me, it was like one of the trauma of my childhood that many people from my school, both teachers and classmates, just disappeared, and there was no internet, so no connection. You know, That was a part also of my life. And yes, so, and afterwards, in the 90s and later, I was able to explore this stories and history of this pre-war Jewish population. And I must say that in general, I was obsessed with...
Why?
Why? So I was obsessed with the Lvov, Lemberg history. That was my city. And I described it in my first novel a little bit. It was like, by that time, the city was revealing the new layers, the old new layers of its history, of absolutely unknown things. Among them, the Jewish story, and for example, heartbreaking stories about, say, Christina Higer. She's the Holocaust survivor, and that's one of the two families who survived Holocaust in Lviv. They were hiding for 13 months in Lviv's sewers underground. Agnieszka Holland made a film of Ciemnościach about this, but I'm not a big fan of this film because, but that's maybe off topic. Anyway, so this is one of the stories, and many more stories how those people were surviving, what was happening, and so that was the reason why I was reading everything which was available, and also I was writing as a novelist. I was trying to write to revive those stories, but at the same time as I have this oral history project, and I was happy to meet many people from pre-war Lviv and record their memories. They now all are dead, but we have them on a website, yeah.
So you could say that in search of Lviv and in search of its history and for the love of Lviv or Lvov, you discovered the Jewish layer, sort of.
So yes, but look, my story was very. I think it was special in terms that I have had this very strong local identity. You know, when I was growing up, and I was asking myself, God, my roots are so complicated, and I'm from the city, and who am I? It was not easy to identify myself as any. I mean, when I was, say, 16 or 20, with any of the nation, but I did have this strong connection to this particular city. So this local identity, that was my identity. Later it has been changing. Yeah.
You describe it very beautifully, and I totally understand your journey. And obviously, a way to understand the present is to know your past. So you are working on this website, and we were promised that the audience will have a glimpse, and you will guide us around a bit on this website. Lwów przedwojenny, meaning pre-war Lviv.
So my idea was...
wait a second, so we can see it.
Maybe I can tell, and then you will...
Okay, there it is.
So unfortunately, it's only in two languages, Polish and Ukrainian, and not totally in Ukrainian. So it's mostly in Polish. And my idea was to put together all of the Lvivian people who remember the witnesses of the pre-war, now I mean the Second World War, who remember personally Lviv before the war, but regardless of their ethnicity. So I do have Polish, Ukrainians, I have one Armenian, she was 100 years old when I recorded her. And also I have one German whom I found in Vienna, and when he moved to Vienna, he became the Pole #1 in Vienna. So his Polish identity was much more active than before. In Lviv, he used to be a German. And plus, I had this honor to record 2 Holocaust survivors, and one was Leszek Allerhand. Probably some of you know this name because he's a grandson of Maurycy Allerhand, who is the renowned, famous Polish lawyer who codify how to say in this independent Poland. He was one who codified the laws, the new laws of new revived. So this grandson who survived the Holocaust because he was with his mother, he was hiding on the Lechakov cemetery. Plus Janina Hesheles, who used to live in Haifa. And she's a daughter of prominent Marian Hesheles, who was a founder of well-known Lvivian newspaper Chwila for the Jews who decided to be assimilated, to become the Poles. So those two. So the website is divided into the topics. You can see the historical episodes, and you can choose, say, like first Soviet occupation, the Holocaust, the second, the German occupation, and you can choose this topic, and then you have many voices of people who remember, or maybe they don't remember, maybe their parents told them. Sometimes it's like with this, 100 years old Armenian. She was telling me about Austro-Hungarian Empire because her mother was in love with Franz Josef somehow, and so but this is also a part of oral history. I mean, the stories of the previous generations. Yeah.
Will we listen to one of the?
So it's only all in Polish. I don't know. We can listen for like 1 minute just to give you an idea.
Yeah, my mom speaks Polish, so
yeah.
Okay, she'll
she will
translate.
listen. Yeah.
There is a sound normally, yeah.
Oh, don't call her.
Yeah, okay, but anyway, it's if you are interested, you can check it later because it's the rich material one can study.
But I'm curious, who is behind this? Have you done any
it's
of these interviews?
all me.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And but who funds it? I mean, is it
So, as I said, my obsession and partly there was a Polish History Museum who gave some funds, but mostly I really wanted just to do it.
But why is awareness of the Jewish life in Ukraine important, and especially right now, you think? At this moment? There's a lot of things going on. I mean, there are so many,
I think I
can
can start on this because that was exactly the very funny question I've been asking in one of the international panelists. They asked, like, how will you guys combine being so Nazis and then having 2 Jewish presidents? I was like, here we go, right? We failed probably in one thing. And this is the thing that propaganda is picturing Ukrainians as Nazis, especially in the very beginning of full-scale invasion. That was one of the propaganda threads. And I think that rediscovering that Ukraine has been and still continue to be one of the European homes for a lot of Jewish people, that we embrace in this part of our cultural minorities, which are being given a way more recognition. You were asking about this renaissance after 90s. And look, even in Lviv, we have this area of synagogues renovated, right? We have this Żovkvo, which is a small town near Lviv, which used to be amazing Jewish culture center. This is a huge, beautiful, very, very old, and it needs a reconstruction, but still quite preserved place for Jewish people. And also, we have no one museum, but we have this private Halician Jews, following Halician Jews museum initiative. And each single museum has ethnography, ours, Museum of Terror, obviously, we have those programs dedicated to Jewish history as well. And there are, if you walk down the city street, you can see all those marks, all those symbols, right? This is part of us, even if it's been hidden. That was, here is house number 41 on a Rynek Square in the city center. And when they started this culture initiative, they had no idea how deep it is with the Jewish history. When we went to the underground parts, we found some notes written probably on those days during the Second World War, where Jews had to hide there. And just to understand how all those things linked, like for example, my grandma, she was held in a transit prison where our actual Museum of Terror is, and I only discovered it a couple of years ago. What was the reason? My granddad, he was the head of Ukrainian community in Belz, and he had nothing to do with Jewish, but they had a private theater, and they were run in different places, German and Jewish including. And when Nazi came, they were hiding Jewish family. But if they were running also German plays, someone from German police just told them, look, they are coming for you. So just to understand the history and reality of our region, you need to know all those little details, how linked all those family, neighborship, and other cultural shifts were.
So I don't know really how to express this, but I have the feeling that the interest for restoring or rediscovering Jewish life is not as part of like restoring only your neighbor's history, but it's part of rebuilding yourself. Is it
our own identity?
Your identity.
If I can add something. I think it's not an easy question, especially now about this commemoration, but I think step by step some very important things have place. For example, right before the pandemic, Philip Sands, who is the famous lawyer from Britain, came, and he initiated 2 memorial plaques in Lviv, which one is for Hersch Lauterpacht, and the second for Raphael Lemkin, both the world-known lawyers who who coined the terms genocide and the crimes against humanity, and they were connected to Lviv. And I think before that, and before his book, which has been published in Ukrainian as well, people didn't know about their connections to Lviv. And one is connected to Lviv's university, and the second as well. Yes. So now we have those 2 plaques, for example, and that was I think that was a very important event. But still, recently there was a big discussion about this renaming the streets. And a big discussion about Deborah Fogel, who is a Polish Yiddish poet, and very much connected to Lviv. But it was not possible to give her a street. But maybe in future.
Why wasn't it possible? I
don't know. But the discussion was a wave of renaming, which is called decommunization, and some other heroes were somehow more popular. But at the same time, in the social media, there was a big discussion about that. Hey, look, before the World War II, it was 1/3 of city's population. I mean, the Jewish population, and now we have 7 streets named after the Jewish people and no woman. And Deborah Fogel is, and she's a poet. She died in Holocaust in Lviv. She's just tightly connected. Yes.
As the Ukrainian Association of Cultural Studies, we were supporting actually this initiative, but this is a big issue of educating also those which have a decision-making capacity, let's say. And this is also a result of this, you know, cultural occupation when you only rediscovering that it's part of your history. Not for all people it's so easy pie to get, because let's say the tension between different nations were nurtured in Soviet times. We had a lot of very not nice anecdotes and blaming someone like, oh, you are too smart and too, you know, are you Jewish? And that was kind of embarrassing to say or to hear. And this is the reality of my childhood. I still do remember this quite well. So even just switching between Żyd, Yuriy, and especially in our region, that was very difficult because Żyd in Polish have no negative connotation, but in Ukrainian it does. All those little issues, they still ongoing. That's part of rediscovering.
Yuriy, we talked on the phone the other day, and you told me about your Jewish journey. And I was moved and excited. And it all started with music that you heard in Berlin as an adult, which reminded you...
Not quite accurate.
Okay.
No, and this is...
So,
actually,
would you share?
Well, I was much younger. I used to share... My parents and me used to share our apartment with my grandparents. And my granddad was a huge music lover and failed musician. His violin got stolen while he was running from the Germans in 1941, and he became a dentist. And but he still had this huge music collection, records, records and tapes. And I was often sick as a child, and would stay home and would listen to tapes and records with him. And he had this eclectic music taste. And I remember discovering so much music through him. And some parts of it were, some stuff was Jewish, and he was telling me, and I didn't know what he meant, actually, because I was too small. I was like 3 and 4, and I didn't know we're Jewish. I think I realized, like I was told as when I was 6 or 7, and it didn't come, it was just like that, you know, like, and by the way, we're Jewish. And I'm like, so it didn't come with the user manual, you know. I was like, what's that? But then I remembered, like, you know, one of these tiny things that connected me to this was me remembering that my granddad has some Jewish music in his tape recorder and record player. And when I came to Germany, I was 20 and I was into music, but different types of music, more into like contemporary punk and grunge music. I remember I was really like, it was my parents' decision to leave Ukraine at that point. And I thought, you know, one good thing about it is that I finally get access to record stores, because we didn't have so many in Kharkiv at that point. And I remember standing in a record store and exploring, you know, bit by bit what's there. And suddenly there was this shelf for Jewish music, and I was like, why? Do they know my grandpa? And then I discovered the word klezmer, and I was like, what is this? I've never heard of it. And I read the booklet, and it said that this is an Jewish Eastern European wedding music. And I was intrigued, and there was an opportunity to listen to the CDs, and I listened to them patiently, and I hated all of them, all 3. And these were mostly German klezmer bands. There was this wave of discovering this music, which started in the United States in the 70s and came to Europe a bit later, in the 80s. And I think I just missed this wave, but there were still German bands trying to play this music, and some of them even successfully. And it didn't sound like wedding music, it did sound more like a funeral band, you know. So I couldn't imagine dancing to it. But I think that was the moment when I became intrigued and interested, and this is how my conscious musical journey started, to find something different. And it resulted in a book which I wrote 3 years ago, called Richard Wagner and the Klezmer Band, searching for the new Jewish sound in Germany. And I became a musician myself, I became a DJ, I played part of my findings during my DJ sets, I still do. And yes, so I think there, you know, the interesting part is that this, like growing up with some bits and pieces, learning about some bits and pieces of Jewish history, felt like, and I think it was something also encouraged by my parents, maybe indirectly, believing that this is a parallel world. We had a circle, like my parents had a circle of friends that were mostly Jewish, and they would sometimes listen to these records. Then there were some books that they would share and talk about, but it felt like this is something that doesn't really happen. You know, like I hardly had any Jewish friends. Then I did. Then there was this rediscovering of Jewish roots in the early '90s, when there were organizations from Israel and states coming, and there were Jewish camps. Synagogue was reopened in Kharkiv in the early '90s, and so. At some point, I realized that basically there is much more common between Ukrainian history and Jewish history, and in fact, a lot of Jewish history is actually been happening in Ukraine. And I remember coming to Germany and then like talking to a lot of people in the States who would always say they are Russian Jews, but you know, the second question, so where exactly, which part of Russia you come from? I would say from Ukraine. Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipro. And this is embarrassing, basically. And I think an important part of what I've been doing for years is trying to give these people a soundtrack and making them remember and zoom in their own history, you know, to realize where they come from. And, you know, Hasidism was born in Ukraine, and Hasidim believe that you have to address God with a joy and song. And their nigunim, which is like Hasidic prayers or mantras, sometimes without words, just going like yam bam vai, could go for hours. This some of Hasidic nigunim do have Ukrainian lyrics, and this is like I remember discovering a record which was recorded in the late 20s in New York by a cantor, a synagogue cantor. Who came from Ukraine, I believe, and I heard Ukrainian, and what I heard was a drinking song. So it didn't actually, it wasn't a religious song. It didn't mention, well, it did, actually it was mixed. It had some 2 or 3 lines in Yiddish that did mention God somehow, but the rest was like a long story of how the guy had been drinking. Like, I've been drinking on Monday.
Oh, but that's the one that we prepared. So let's listen.
Let's give it a listen.
So after all, it's Shabbos. And let's drink.
Let's have some drinking.
Yeah.
It's a sad song. You gotta know how to party. Okay, it goes for another 2 hours that we don't have. Thank you.
You know what? You just reminded me of a funny story from my young years when I used to work as a tourist guide, and each time in Budapest, when our Ukrainian tourists would be drunk with Tokaj wine, they asked, "Have an agila, please." And I do remember like Austrians sitting like, "Oh, how funny and how joyful are those Jewish people?" And I was like, Jewish people. This is what we always dance on our Ukrainian weddings.
Exactly.
Havanagila.
This is how Havanagila, actually.
Yeah, it's Żydobanderowicz.
Yeah, Żydobanderowicz, exactly. So this is how it always mixed up. And this is a part of our childhood memories, which we were not literally marking, like, are you Jewish or not?
This was natural. This was something just happening.
Yeah,
So
just
something you didn't
just
question.
let me explain maybe this term Żydobanderowicz. It's very humoristic, and I hope Polish people will not be scared because it actually it appeared after and during the Revolution of Dignity, which means like Jewish Bandera supporter in one word. You know, which was the aim was to frighten those Russians and those propaganda who were telling that Ukrainians are Nazi. They are anti-Jewish, Nazi, which means like in German sense. So they coined this term Żydobanderowicz so that they, at the same time, they support Bandera and they are Jewish. And that became a kind of
historically
joke. It was just a joke to name oneself Żydobanderowicz, just to to mock the Russians and to mock those so now it's entirely into culture to call oneself Żydobanderowicz.
So what does it? Who is a Żydobandera? Who?
Him.
You know, it's a way to lighten those very frightening things, like Stepan Bandera and also
Bandera. I don't know if
Jew-
everyone knows who
and
that
having
was.
Jewish roots. So
It's a nationalist.
I think yes, this is this very Ukrainian, very humoristic approach to the things. Yeah.
It is.
Fascinating. Thank you. We'll listen to another song in a minute. But Olha, let's get back to one of your major projects, the Territory of Terror Memorial Museum in Lviv. Where is it? Is it a building? And
it's a
who's
building.
behind it?
Who's behind that? That's such a
Yeah, I
Jewish
mean
question.
the project. Where is it?
This is a municipal memorial museum, so I presume Lviv City Council is behind it. And
We'll check.
this quite new one. It's been opened only in 2017, but been under building process over a decade. That's a complicated issue. And its place. There are two buildings, like two barracks on the place of the. That's very painful place, actually, especially for Jewish history. This is a place where this transit prison was held, and about at least 130,000 of Ukrainian Jews, they went to their last journey to the concentration camp.
And how
exactly
is that
from place.
presented or going to be presented?
It is presented. We are holding a regular exhibition. Our main barrack is the history of the Lviv in between of two world wars, and also represents all those persecution and how the terror being held on civilians, Ukrainian, Jewish people, all the other nations there. But also we were holding thematic exhibitions, and we're talking about, and also platform for sharing all those things as our Holocaust. We have a publication on Yaniv Cemetery, which is quite important in terms of regaining our cultural heritage. And also we collecting a huge archive of oral history testimonies, and we cooperated with Żanna in a very nice way also on that. And now we collecting the Rosenthal family history case. And on those oral history, this is very interesting and probably saying moment, and when most of those people in the end of their narrative biographical interviews, which always been like 3 to 5 hours sometimes, and they are almost all those that was part of our project Unheard, they are 80 plus, and huge part of them at the end are crying and saying, this is the very first time in my life I'm revealing my personal story. And this is probably a very important thing to understand about all this coverage.
I was sorry.
And it's also the entrance to the Lviv's ghetto,
Yeah.
which is very important Jewish place, because there is a memorial.
Memorial, it's just literally in front of the
In front of,
entrance of our museum. So this is a probably one of the, after the synagogues and Golden Rose Place, this is the second Jewish place to visit in Lviv, for sure.
And when was this project initiated?
Well, it was, as I told, opened as a museum in 2017, but that was in process over a decade. That was just to building it. And here is also the train car as this transferring train part, which is very painful memory because it's literally one of those which were transporting people.
Yeah, and in the middle of the city. It's not the capital, but it's in the middle of the city.
It's a cultural capital.
Yeah. Yeah, cultural capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I need to go there. I'm fascinated. I was recently in Warsaw. I've been there many times, but I have a feeling that in my experience is that in Poland, when they are remembering World War II, they're not specifically addressing Jews in that way. It's something that
We've been there.
I mean, that's weird that you say that because they just opened a huge Jewish dedicated museum, which is one of the best.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing. And also one of probably, I used to live literally behind the corner of the street, which was the gate of Ghetto. And the tram number 1 Germans were using, they were passing by and Jewish people were not allowed to use train. So that was a place of special embarrassment. Then they were holding people if they needed to cross the street to go to the pharmacy, to pick up their kids, whatever it was, just holding them and then commanding, run, given a very limited time. So they literally had to run to cross the street and also blackmouthing them from that train. So, and I think that in Warsaw, it's especially very painful place. Probably, I think that maybe in Warsaw you can sense that because Warsaw was destroyed, basically. So there are very limited number of historical
exactly.
sites.
So
Krakow is slightly different in that terms, but I think that actually this is where the big historical, not a methodological exchange happening with our Polish colleagues in terms of rebuilding this, because this is a shared history. This is us, Poland and Czech region mostly. That was the biggest part of this.
But I can add that just before this panel we were discussing this with Stefan, that I think that the Poles coped really great with this Jewish topic during recent 30 years. Who else you can just find in Europe who maybe the museum is not the most important thing to do, but I mean all kinds of publications, all kinds of researches and public dialogue and Jedwabne and saying sorry. For me, it's just I think it's just a great example how the topic could be proceeded very honestly and on a very deep, also intellectual level.
Back to our museums, by the way, that we recently opened our main office, like office for scientific workers, and this is placed, it's located on Shalom Aleichem Street. And when we started, there was a very old library storage. So we got it for temporary usage, something like that. And when we started renovating rooms, we found out that this one of the rooms is painted as a synagogue. You visited it, right?
Yes, exactly, yes.
And then later on, we discovered that there was probably somewhere there on Shalom Aleichem Street, the Great Jewish Museum between 1934 until 1940s.
Goldstein.
Yes, exactly.
Maximilian Goldstein, the collection area.
So this is how it's all close and linked, and we had no idea when we got the location at all. That was absolutely accidental research and opening.
But that was the second Jewish district in Lviv. Yes,
fantastic. But being at war, I mean, there is a nationalist wave over the world, you can say, but when you're under attack this way, there is a certain it's stronger nationalism when you're under attack. How do you deal with? Is there some kind of nostalgia with the old old-time nationalists, like from the 1920s, that you mentioned Bandera, and there's Simon Petliura, and are they restored, or how do you deal with it? Because they were at the same time anti-Semite.
I mean,
And-
I just mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, 1918, right? The state document 4 languages, including Yiddish, and this, which states that this is reflecting the natural
This is
state of
Petliura,
things.
basically, to you. It's also the what I just saw at the YIVO, at the Yiddish archive in New York, the biggest one in the whole world, was a note from, like, I don't remember how, I think it was it definitely was Ukrainian People's Republic. It was from 1918, and it was Karbovanets with also it had Ukrainian and Yiddish on it.
Yes.
And this is the first time when Yiddish was used on a banknote.
As well as the army documentation was also run on Yiddish as well. So it just represents how it looked. And in terms of the war affair starting, the main thing which happening, it's not nationalism, it's unity. This is how it's happening. This is when we all united to work all together against our shared enemy. We are not dividing, like, are you Jewish? Are you going to fight for...
I mean, I think it's Ukrainians can't afford it now. You know.
To be nationalist, you
No, no,
unity
to
something
divide.
else. Yeah.
It's
To
the
be
time
divide.
of yes. It's.
I mean, we are nationalists, but just let's remember that Ukrainian nationalism is embracing it all. Like, I am Galician, this is my very strong identity. I live in Lviv, my daughter is raised there. First thing you ask her, who are you? She's Ukrainian. I just live in London for now. That's it. That's it. So our nationalism is absolutely something different than this Nazi idea. That's way far from it.
Look, there is still this Polish-Ukrainian issue about Volhynia, 1932, but it is endless. It is endlessly manipulating, and I wonder how it will be solved one day, because now, unfortunately, it is one great manipulation. If you ask Polish people who are using this, they most probably have no idea what have really happened in Volhynia in 1932.
Could you recall what was it about in 1932?
So there were ethnical cleansings in Volhynia region by the Ukrainian nationalists, and this is an issue and question which is not solved between Poland and Ukraine, but it is endlessly the way of manipulating, I don't know, Polish people who are voting, Polish voters, or Polish people who are afraid of the Ukrainian refugees, and so on and so forth. It's a big thing to still work which has to be done. Yeah.
And Olha, you had the opportunity to read a lot of texts when you were in the jury of the Ukrainian Jewish Literature Prize encounter.
Oh, true.
Yeah. So is there any particular text that you were stricken by, or
Most of them. And honestly, I would never read 20 books in a row with such a dramatic narratives for purpose. And just to understand, I wasn't obliged to read all 20s. I had to read the short list, which were 10. And despite all the challenges, I went back to the long list and read it all. One of the books I would absolutely love to recommend you, and it's absolutely represented on the back. It's Amadoka by Sofia Andruchowicz. This is the one which got a Grand Prix prize that year. That was the 4th year of Encounter American Ukrainian Literature Award Prize, and I was honored to work in a jury with Olena Styashkina and Oksana Forostina. Both are doing a lot for Ukrainian history, and also understand this is very important that also, look, none of us is just particularly Jewish and very narrow in our expertise. In my background, I used to be head of UNESCO City of Literature office and doing for a decade then working in a Pan International for a long time, so I'm in a literature field. But that was very important for organizers, for us to have represented those links in between of Ukrainian and Jewish history. Amadorka is a masterpiece, and you're not going to enjoy it. I work all my life with sensitive topics: deportation, lost childhood, everything like that. And that was a book which made me, even if I didn't smoke those times, I had to take a few smoke breaks. Just in terms of, this is probably 3 novels in one. It has 3 different lines. It has a Soviet time history, it has a contemporary, like modern time history, which is most annoying, by the way, and it has a beautiful Jewish time like this, just right before the Second World War history, which is just amazingly written, and it shows in a very detailed way how all those human relationships were built. But it's quite traumatic. I mean, that it shows all the reality of things.
And it was written in Ukrainian?
It was written in Ukrainian.
Did you get a lot of contributions? Did you get a lot of contributions to the competition?
Oh yeah, quite a lot. We had the technical jury worked quite harsh, and honestly, on this competition, on that year prize, because one year it's non-fiction, another year it's fiction. On fiction, it's always more.
Oh, so it's recurring?
Yeah, it's recurring. And on this year, that we even got the book of poetry, and that was very difficult to evaluate poetry and prose in the same list. We were very hesitating what the methodology of the evaluation should be. When we read it, all 3 of us, we never agreed on the first time. Like, yes, for this one. So honestly, for me, this is also quite important recognition, because my little dream for this award is it became the benchmark, like quality mark. Then people are just definitely taking it as a quality level. And I think that Amadorka proven itself. It just now translated in plenty of languages, and it's difficult reading, intellectual reading, not complex reading, but also it's absolute masterpiece.
And how old is this person? Is it young people?
Sophia, she's probably my age. I don't know if I'm old or not.
So if I can add something, if we are into literature, I could also recommend you a very special book of poetry by Marianna Kijanowska.
Oh yeah.
And this is a Jewish book, The Voices of Babin Yar.
That's not a Jewish book.
But this is what links us all.
It's a book written by Ukrainian on,
yes.
I mean,
on a Jewish subject.
On a Jewish subject. You're absolutely right. But but I think it's the first one of this kind in Ukraine.
Of this kind?
Yeah.
I think especially this powerful. This is how we
This is the only
magic.
one.
This is how we. No, they're not the only one. This is the first and then probably the most powerful one. This is how we met, basically. There was a presentation of Babin Yar in London with Marianna Kijanowska, and I was the only visitor.
Yes.
With a kid. My daughter was like 7 or 8, and everyone was like, why are you bringing your kid to such a traumatic experience? And I was looking at him and like, he seems to be a cool guy. but doing such a things, he seems to be a cool guy.
But why is it important to mention? Because it was awarded by the most important Ukrainian award, Shevchenkivska Premia. So being not a Jewish book, but book on a Jewish topic, it was like highly appreciated in Ukraine, which is I think it is important.
It's
but
unique, yes.
But also it was awarded in the USA by Harvard Press, and in Poland. In Polish language, it has been translated brilliantly by the best translator, Adam Pomorski, and it also was awarded by Zbigniew Herbert Award. Yeah.
And it's most searchable in the US on this topic. By the way, after the award, we were talking about it with Olha the other day, so this is one of the most representative and totally unique.
Yeah, so it's time for us to listen to your second choice, Yuriy. Yes. And it's about, I think this choice is interesting, and it tells a bit about your search and your identity, but because when you left Ukraine, you didn't have any particular Jewish identity, and you weren't looking for it either. Your life took place in music, as you told us, and yet something happened when you read about the poet.
Let me tell this story. Let me start with the fact that me and a dear friend and colleague of mine, probably one of the best-known Ukrainian writers and poets, Serhiy Żanna, were invited by Art Arsenal in Kiev to create a soundtrack for their exhibition dedicated to the subject of Ukrainian futurism, experimental poetry and art in the 20s. And I actually came to Kharkiv, where Serhiy lives, and stayed at the residency of Kharkiv Literature Museum, which is situated in the house, in the legendary historical building, this Slovo house, this house of word, which was built in 1929 for Kharkiv used to be Ukrainian, capital of Soviet Ukraine at that point, and it was built for the writers who were naturally in the capital, and all of them living, or most of them living in this house. And in the early 90s, guess what happened to them? Most of them were brutally killed or sent to the labor camps. And while we were working, Serhiy was curating the choice of the texts. I was creating music. We were sitting in this apartment on the first floor of the Slovo building, and suddenly I realized we have 9 of 10 songs that we planned, and they were all based on the texts by male writers, poets. And I was like, this is not possible, and we just can't do that. Wasn't there, what about female poets? And then someone, I think it was our curator, Xana from the Art Arsenal, she said, oh, by the way, there's Raisa Trojanker, and I never heard of her, and I was like, who's that? She said, well, she's Jewish. She wrote in Ukrainian. She wrote 2 or 3 books of poetry. Her father, she's from Uman, which is a legendary place in the Jewish history. And her father worked in a local synagogue. And this sounds like a Netflix series, basically. She ran away from home when she was 14 with the traveling circus because she fell in love with an Italian circus artist. Mm-hmm. And then she fell in love with Volodymyr Sosura, one of the well-known Ukrainian poets who also at some point lived in Kharkiv, and I think it's with him that she came to Kharkiv, and through him she fell in love with Ukrainian poetry and started writing in Ukrainian, and I think she also fell in love with most of the male inhabitants of the Slovo house, and she wrote erotic poetry, and this is I think it's quite unique, and I think it's a pioneer work in some terms. And she also, but what I particularly enjoyed while reading her poetry were her stories of her Jewish experience. Like she had a child, and that she wasn't married, and she goes with this child. Child's dad is a goy, is non-Jew, and together with her young daughter, they go to visit her family in Uman, and his father doesn't want to know her anymore, but his mother does, and she writes about this stuff in Ukrainian. It's an amazing story, and so we created a song based on one of her poems, which is a part of the of her erotic poems, and it's interesting. It's she's writing a letter to a tiger that she used to work with at the circus. Sometimes it sounds like they were in love, but maybe not. So is it a tiger or someone who worked with the tiger? You can tell. But this is a typical Raisa Trojanker
Let's hear it.
Lyric, and it's sung, it's sung by Luba Yakimchuk, a very well-known Ukrainian poet, contemporary poet, and she did a great job.
Пам'ятаєш місто маленьке на далекій глухій провінції, де не чути трамвайного дзенькоту, де любов перелята завінця. Пам'ятаєш маленький цирк і мене, укротительку звірів, незабутих хвилин цих, невимовно болючих і щирих. Пам'ятаєш притих партер, і за першим дзвоником другий ти об ноги мої тер, шкіри своєї смуги. Пригадай золоті сни, мій німий смугастий любовнику. Пригадай після виступу ніч, таку страшну й молитовну.
Лапа твоя на моє стегно, я у клітці, тиша густа, хрестик синьо таємний, там ми зараз біля живота.
I was thinking of, like, while working on the music, I was thinking of Serge Gainsbourg, like very well-known French composer. And the fact is that both parents of Gainsbourg come from Ukraine, basically from Odessa and Kharkiv. So it was, I think, we took them all home. And now I'm working on a Yiddish version of this song. It already exists in French and German. So the next one to come out will be the one in Yiddish.
So Serge Gainsbourg and Raisa Trojanka, what a beautiful wrap-up of this conversation. I think it's time to open up if there are any questions. Is there, yeah.
I thought it's for champagne. It's for microphones.
Дуже дякую. In Sweden there is a saying, my slave has his own slave, in the sense that even the one who is oppressed can also be a suppressor. My question is about what, because of the Jewish presence in Ukraine, also a big part of the Ukrainian history is also about many of these pogroms. What place do they have in contemporary history books? What does Ukrainians learn about these pogroms that took place?
It's a brilliant question, but I believe still not enough. It's still too little. And honestly, you do remember when we got our independence back in 90s, we were literally rediscovering ourselves. And there was a question on a previous panel about our textbooks. I'm a kid of 80s, so during my school years, we exchanged 6 different textbooks, and in the end, our teacher gave up and told we could have arts on during those things because I'm not coping. Literally, this is exactly what happened. And then we were only on university reading some original documents. And I think that then we had quite a nice decade. We just were talking about it over lunch with Żanna, that we had this nice decade when it was peaceful and we finally got this luxury of self-reflection. And all those things started to upbuilding. We opened synagogues, we fixed the synagogue place in Lviv, we started to raise money to rebuild the Żovka synagogue, we opened some in Kyiv, but also how vivid and vital it is. I think probably that's an anecdotal story, but there was one of my first visiting in Ukraine after the full-scale invasion, and I felt a bit scared. I didn't know how to cross the border by feet, and you know whom I met there? All those Hasid guys, which were slightly drunk, singing, and seemed quite happy being back from Ukraine from the celebration. I thought, if they can do that, obviously we can do that. And I think this is a very vital sign of how things work. And Uman, you mentioned Uman, which is a significant place for...
The magnets, yes.
And so I think that we are at the very beginning of this long path, if I may say, and such a great project as Żanna's or discovery researches of our institution, and such a things as Yuriy does together with the other artists in terms of popularization the topic also to discovery. But unfortunately, that's not definitely the best time to rewrite the... I mean, we just have no means, we have no hands. We are all protecting our country right now. This is what stopped us on a way we're not going to
on
pause
these and other paths.
for long.
And what about you, Yuri? You didn't go to school. I mean, you mostly went to
I went to
German
school.
I mean, went to school in Ukraine.
Obviously, I did. I came to Germany when I was 20.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yes, well, I also lived in the challenging times when, and with old history teachers who I think didn't rely on all these new books, you know, they knew their history. It's interesting because I've been thinking, you know, it's also somehow, it was a part of your introduction that I meant to address, is that somehow the story of Jews in Ukraine, when chosen to be told shortly, it usually concentrates on pogroms.
Yeah, true.
And this is sad, because there were not only pogroms. Pogroms were there, and this is a terrible part of this history, but that was not only that. And talking like on and on about pogroms is a part, basically somehow goes well with the Russian narrative, which makes Ukrainians Nazis, because the next thing you say is that Ukrainians were the organizers of these pogroms, and then this is something that we've been hearing from Moscow for
But this
many
is
years.
exactly part of the Soviet heritage on a history teaching. That's it. And this is our big challenge and task to unpack it the further way and more fair representation of events.
You know, I remember, I just can't not think about that while thinking of Jewish matters. That does have less to do with Ukraine. Is like on the terrible day of October 7th, 2 years ago. I've been living in Germany for 30 years, and Germany embraced us as Jewish immigrants. The only people who contacted me on this day were my Ukrainian friends.
Really?
Yes, like with condolences and saying, tell your Israeli friends and family to come to Ukraine. They will be welcome there. Not a single German told me this.
That's very touching. Well, Olha, Yuriy, Żanna, it was...
Sorry, we have one more question
sorry.
from Stefan here.
I have a question, because maybe the taboos are not always what we think they are. Żanna, when we spoke earlier, I mean, looking at Ukraine from a distance, you might think that the Holocaust or the Jewish history is the difficult subject, but we spoke about the Soviet Jewish period, which, I mean, it's rightfully framed as a silence or a pause, but it's also, I mean, as you already mentioned, I mean, Jews were living in Ukraine, and also, I mean, maybe the taboo aspect of this is that this community was largely Russian-speaking, and that it doesn't really fit the narrative as well. Or there needs to be a bit of twerking here into how they perceive their identity, the language aspects of it, and everything else. Żanna, if you would just, I mean, because I think this could be one of the difficult, really, topics to fit into the narrative today.
Also many things to tell, and it is so complicated, and it always, you know, when it is a borderland of cultures and languages and religions, it's always so complicated. It's not easy to just to explain it immediately. And so speaking about back to pogroms, I was thinking also about the brilliant Grzegorz Gauden's book about Polish-Ukrainian war and the pogrom after the Poles won this war, and that book it has been published a couple of years ago, and it has been translated into Ukrainian, and it was awarded in Ukraine as well. So the topics are like really we need more time to explore all of this. Speaking about 7th of October, I recently listened to Likhachev's presentation, who is an expert on the like Jewish topics in Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine is a country where after 7th of October there were no in some places only flag of Israel. Just to illustrate you.
True, I've been there.
Yeah, to illustrate you the specific situation of Ukraine. Like no pro-Palestinian support. I'm not judging it now, but just to explain how it looks like. So it was totally pro-Israel in this respect. Then again, so the Soviet Jews, it's, you know, by that time in Soviet Union, I think it was logical that they were Russian speaking, but at the same time, there is Moisei Fishbane, who is an Yiddish, who is a Ukrainian, who is a Jewish poet who used to write in Ukrainian, and he's just a great poet. So it's not very homogenical. And again, those Soviet Jews who disappeared from the city, not disappeared, they just immigrated, but they are not here. And recently, I was in Ukraine last week, and we were just walking with my friend, and all of a sudden, we were recalling some Jewish people who used to live here. The Soviet Jewish people. And he said, oh, this is the son of my friend, and mentioned the name. And in this window, there was a girl who immigrated to Israel. And they, like, no, now they are absent. But I think that somehow they will come back, because it's another layer. And Lviv, at least, I don't know how about the whole Ukraine, but maybe the whole Ukraine is like this. But Lviv and Lvov is like this. It's just the layers and layers and layers of history you have and you want to discover. It's
There
endless.
was no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there was no, I mean, as a former Russian speaker, as my native Russian speaker, and also someone who's been, you know, a fan of Jewish subject for the last 30 years, I can't really remember of anything worth attention on specifically Jewish subject created in the Soviet Union, in the years of the Soviet Union. I mean, neither by Jews nor by non-Jews, though I can think of the book of oh my God, Anatoly, the book on Babi, the first book on Babi Yar, Anatoly Kuznetsov, thank you, which was written in the 60s. It was published, was heavily censored. It first appeared in a magazine, and so it was shortened and censored. Then it appeared as a book. It was still shortened and censored, and then it basically was published in the full form in London, where he had to flee. This is one of the most important books on the Jewish history. So it's complicated. Kuznetsov wrote it in Russian. He was neither. He wasn't a Jew. I'm not even sure he was ethnically Ukrainian, but he wrote it in Russian and published it in London. And yes.
I think that from the cultural study, I need to add here something very important. You should remember that in Soviet Union, we were all cosmopolitans, and career-wise, you should speak and you should speak and write in Russian, right? No. Let me just continue, right? And then even maybe like we were speaking Ukrainian at home, but when I went to university in 90s, just, you know, the biggest thing was to be published in St. Petersburg journals. You know, to be a scientist, you need to be serious, you need to speak Russian. And Ukrainian language was positioned as a rural language. We are all mostly urban guys. First money my mom was making as a kid, there was in Shargorod, Vinnytska region, on Shabbat, helping Jews living there, bringing food and serving them on Shabbat. And she said they were talking with the surjik of Yiddish and Ukrainian. And what I can see now, that obviously this heritage from the Soviet times, and especially when positioning yourself was as a Jewish person origin, was so dangerous that you should change your surname, change the titles and everything. Now it's a very, very smooth pushback. As you can see, people are changing, going back to their original names, surnames. And I had a lot of friends. I just actually liked dating Jewish guys. And we were switching in between of Russian and Ukrainian just as we were bilingual, right? So I think that this is also part of external point of view. We also need to research and dig deeper, because sometimes we think that if we know this is the only way how it was. But when my mom shares some stuff from her childhood in that region, and she is from the region where there was very, rural areas, no one cared too much. When they were left alone, their traditions looked way different than in Lviv, than they were, observed, and that they had to hold back in representing their identities sometimes. So I think that this is a huge unknown area, and we should be also very careful to touch it, and just any evaluation seems way too early. Probably we need at least a few decades of very deep research to understand how things looked then back. But we're trying. Thank you for being with us in this journey.
Right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Olha. Thank you, Yuriy. Thank you, Żanna. And I hope this conversation will go on, and there's so much more to explore. And let's hope for a bright Jewish Ukrainian future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.